A little stroll around the neighbourhood hedgerows today has yielded bullaces, elderberries, and also blackberries and dewberries. I think today we're going to make some jam. So we're going to make some lovely purple jam out of all of these lovely dark purple fruits. Just a little bit of prep to do first. I've got to get these elderberries off the stalks. These are black elderberries, Sambucus nigra. They are edible raw if you wanted to, but better cooked. Other species of elder can be toxic, so make sure you know what you're picking. Now I should say probably at the start of this that I don't think it's a good idea for people to just go out and randomly pick berries and make jam out of them. There are lots of things out there that could harm you. I'm doing this because I'm very certain of the identity of the things I'm picking. We'll talk more about that in a moment. Bullaces are small plums, similar to damsons, not quite the same thing as sloes, although they're quite often found growing alongside sloes, and actually they hybridise with sloes so often you'll find a hedgerow with lots of different sort of intermediate forms of damsons, bullaces, sloes. I found these growing right next to sloes, in fact. I'll show you the difference. Sloes are typically small, about 1 to 1.5 centimetres in diameter, and at this time of year, which is end of August, hard. The leaves on the plants are quite small, and the plants themselves are quite thorny. Bullaces are typically found in a more open, sort of structured bush or tree, with larger leaves, and at this time of year, they are soft and starting to be completely ripe. But as I say, you can quite often find hybrids of the two. Blackberries, I think, probably need no introduction, but dewberries, which are very similar to blackberries, and obviously related, have got a kind of bluish-grey bloominess on them, and often when you try to pick them, they fall apart. So I've got a few dewberries in there, but mostly blackberries. And I think to even things out, because I want approximately the same quantity of blackberries, elderberries, and plums, I've got some blackberries that we picked and froze the other day. These are the ones I picked in competition with Jenny, or what's left of them. Elderberries need to be removed from their stalks. The stalks can be unpleasant, bitter or something like that, I think, and possibly slightly toxic. You can use a fork for this, but I just prefer to just brush them off with my fingers like this. This is particularly useful if you've got a bunch that's got some unripe elderberries on it. Using your fingers tends to leave the unripe ones on the stalks. Some of these are lovely, great big elderberries, biggest I've seen. So anyway, going to put these in a bowl and I'm going to wash them. Don't always wash wild fruit that I pick, if I pick it from quite high up, but elderberries do tend to accumulate dust. I'm going to make a seedless jam, which is not quite the same as a jelly, because I'm going to strain it and use the fruit pulp. A jelly, at least if you're talking about formal terminology in the UK, a jelly that you might see at a country show or something like that would have to be clear. It would have to be transparent. So normally a jelly is made from fruit that's cooked and then strained in a jelly bag without squeezing it. So you just get the clear juice, and then that is boiled with sugar to set it. A jelly is a very fine and delicate thing. In fact, I'll go and show you. I've got a jar of jelly. So there's a jar of apple jelly that I bought somewhere or other, I can't remember where. Probably not show quality because it's a little bit cloudy. But what we're making today is not a jelly, it's a seedless jam. So I'm going to cook the fruit and then force it through a sieve. I'm going to get the juice and the pulp. These bullaces, I'll see if they come off the stone. So I'll try and cut them in half and see if I can remove the stones. If I can remove the fruit from the stones, I'll cook the skins and the pulp. If I can't, I'm just going to stew them down and then strain the stones out. I'm hoping the plums will come off the stones because I quite like damson jam or bullish jam with skins in it. The skins almost kind of become candied, and of course it imparts a lot more flavour. Right, I'm going to turn the camera off because this bit is quite tedious. Now, I'm only about halfway done on these elderberries, but to keep things manageable I'm going to wash these in a smaller batch. And washing will achieve a couple of things. As I say, elderberries accumulate a bit more dust than blackberries. They're on the tree longer and they're a bit sticky on the outside, and so whereas blackberries I will often feel that I can just pick them and eat them straight away. Others might disagree, but I don't generally worry about washing blackberries if they look clean. Elderberries very often benefit from a little bit of washing. The other thing is that the unripe berries float up. So the berries that aren't going to be so good for cooking anyway tend to float up to the surface and can be just skimmed off. Together with the bits and pieces of stalk, or most of them anyway. And the plan is to try and get most of the stalks out. Doesn't matter if you leave a few in. And what we're left with is lovely, clean, ripe elderberries. Oh look, it's a heart shape. And there's the water after washing. You can see we've lost a little bit of juice, but not much. And if I'd done that with the bilberries I picked earlier in the year, which I'd never wash, bilberries, if you wash them, the water afterwards looks like juice, and you know that you're just losing half of what you just picked. Not so with elderberries, so yeah, that's part of the reason I'm happy enough to wash them. Okay, beautiful elderberries, quantity don't know, together with blackberries. If you can hear a scraping sound, by the way, that's Jenny out the back, she's catching frogs. More blackberries, these are the frozen ones. About the same quantity of blackberries and elderberries. That's all I can say at the moment. Doesn't matter that I don't know the quantity of the fruit because we're going to strain this and then measure the pulp. So that can go on the heat and we'll leave that to come to a boil. There's enough water and juice in there to work with that. Lid on, we'll go and sort out the plums. So my hope is that we will be able to slice these plums around the middle and get them off the stone. I think we probably can, which is good. Yeah, the stones are going to come out because I'd like to put whole pieces of plum in the jam like that. Not whole, half pieces of plum in the jam like that, because this skin, as I say, the skin's got a lot of flavour in it, got a lot of colour in it, and also it cooks down, it goes like a candied sort of thing. My grandma, when she used to make plum jam, just used to leave the stones in, and she'd tell you, watch out for the stones. So you just have to not bite down too hard on your jam sandwich and spit out the stones. I don't think we ever broke a tooth on it, but it's a bit of a trap for the unwary. Anyway, this is going to be a little bit laborious, but worth it. So you may be wondering why I haven't tasted one of these. So let's do that now. I'll eat one of these raw and we'll see what it tastes like. Okay. Sour, bitter, and astringent. Now some people will tell you that something can't be all of those things at once. Sour normally equates to acid. Bitterness people tend to think of as alkaline or basic, but there are other things that taste bitter that are not basic. I think about orange skin, for example. Seville orange marmalade is both bitter and sour at the same time, so it's acidic but it still tastes bitter as well, and that's what these plums are. They are both bitter and sour, but when they're cooked down with the other fruits and a bit of sugar, that bitterness is going to be balanced, not necessarily neutralised, but just kind of balanced against sweetness, aroma and other factors, so it'll be fine. And when I say astringency, I'm talking about it makes your lips pucker a little bit when you eat it. It makes you feel like your lips are drying up. It feels like your skin is tightening. So yeah, bullaces or damsons, and especially sloes. If I was to try that with a sloe, well, I'd probably spit it out again because they are even more so than this. Astringent, bitter, and very sour. These stones, I think I might keep these and I'll plant them in the woods here at Shrimp Cottage, or scatter them in the woods and we'll let them take their chances, and we might end up with a few bullis trees in the side of the woodland. So a little bit of a faff, and the other way you can do this. So as I say, my grandma used to just leave the stones in and tell people to watch the stones because that's fun. You can cook them and sieve the stones out, but then you lose the skins as well. Typically you just get the pulp. You can do what I'm doing, which is to cut the fruits apart and individually extract the stones. Or you can count the plums, stew them up, and then sift through and remove the right number of stones. I've done that in the past, and it gets a bit frustrating towards the end because you're sifting and sifting and sifting for that last stone, and it takes forever to find it. You'd think it would be relatively simple, but it isn't, and I ended up sifting it for like half an hour to find the last stone. So if the fruit does come off the stones, which it more or less does here, this is my preferred method. Back over here, we'll just check in on the blackberries and elderberries. I have not added any water to that, apart from the water that was just clinging to the fruits after washing. So nearly all of that is juice that's come out of these fruits. Oh, I wish you could be here to smell this. It's so aromatic and fragrant. Blackberries on their own are really fragrant and delicious, but with the elderberries with them, the elderberries seem to add something, well, obviously their own aroma, but the two things combined, little hints of almost floral aroma in there. It's going to be good. Okay, elderberries and blackberries, they've had about, I think about 20 minutes. The heat's going to come off of that. I'm just going to let that sit for a little bit because it's a little bit less hazardous to handle once it's cooled down a bit. All right, stoned bullises, bullis stones. That was really laborious, but probably worthwhile. I did find when I cut them in half that about half a dozen of them were inhabited by plum moth larvae. So we haven't got to eat those today. Not that I'm hugely worried, but usually plum moth larvae do make quite a mess inside the plums. And yeah, that might just taint the batch a little bit. But anyway, so we've got some lovely cleaned stoned bullis plums here. That's going to go into the jam. And I think that was worth it because it's all about the skins. Kitchen's quite a mess at the moment, but there's no point tidying up until we're finished making mess. This elderberry and blackberry mixture, stewed elderberry and blackberry mixture, is going to go through this sieve now. And not too much at a time. I'm just going to press that through this sieve. The seeds are too big to go through the holes in this mesh. And I'm not going to put too much in the sieve because I don't want it to go over the edge. Completely edible, of course, blackberry seeds and elderberry seeds, but blackberry seeds in particular tend to get stuck in your teeth. Or they do in mine. Right, and again, we've got quite a laborious process here, so camera off until this is done. Some people seem to have success using one of those moulis things for doing this. I've tried several different moulis for this, and they always seem to get jammed up with the blackberry seeds. And they either get jammed up and stop turning, or stop pulping, or they grind the blackberry seeds down into basically sawdust that passes through the moulis. So I've not had success with the moulis. I'm going to stop about there. Now you can see I obviously have not extracted all of the juice here because some of it's still coming through. So I might just put this back in the saucepan and give it a mash with a potato masher, and maybe I'll get some more juice out of it. The answer's no, that didn't work. So I'm going to stop there. So just rinse the pan out and return the bullises and all of that blackberry and elderberry juice to the pan. And we've got 1.826 kilos. So we've got about 1.8 kilos of fruit and juice. We're going to add a kilo of sugar, which will be about 64% fruit. Still a heck ton of sugar, but that is how jam works. And now we've got to bring that to the boil and boil it until it reaches the setting point. Obviously, as we boil it, we'll lose some of the moisture and the percentage of sugar will increase. But that's what actually jam is about. That's what will make it set. Right, so the jam's coming up to a boil, and boiling at this point means, well, we'll measure it, but it's probably not going to be setting point yet. We need to boil it until the boiling point is about 105 degrees Celsius, which is obviously above the boiling point of plain water, but that's because it's got sugar in it. So yeah, it's boiling at 100 at the moment. And of course these plums will cook during that process. Meanwhile, we have to sterilise the jars. Now, unlike the pickling I've done recently, the jars do need to be a little bit more hygienic this time because there's no vinegar in this to preserve it. The only thing preserving it is the acidity of the fruit and the sugar, which will do a fairly good job, but we need to sterilise these jars. So I'm going to put those on a tray in the oven and heat them up until they are hot. I can't do that with the lids because they've got a plastic, well, soft rubber seal inside them. So these I'll put in a jug and pour boiling water on them. I think we're getting close to temperature. So I'll just moving the probe around in the bottom so we don't hit some little hot spot. Very close now, so just need to drive a little bit more moisture off. There we go, we hit 105. Just going to leave that for just a minute longer. To sterilise my ladle, I'm just going to put it in the hot jam, because that's hotter than boiling water. So that ought to do it. Of course that will drop the temperature a little bit because it's conducting heat out of the thing, so we'll just turn it back up again. And then we'll get the jars lined up while we're just waiting for this to come back up to temperature. So these jars have been sterilised, but taking them out of the oven, exposing them to the air, kind of undoes that a tiny little bit. So we are relying somewhat on the boiling hot heat of this jam to get us back to a sterile state, or nearly so. It doesn't need to be completely sterile, because there's a lot of sugar in this jam. That's going to prevent a lot of harmful things from prevailing. It's quite liquid going in. I think it's going to be more like a jelly in consistency. I'm going to fill them up quite close to the rim, and then lid on tight while it's still nice and hot. I'll screw that down properly in a moment. If you wanted this jam to last forever, or something like that, you could can it, you could pressure can it. So you could put it in a pressure canner, which would heat it up further inside of the jars and completely sterilise it. This level of kind of preservation is probably enough to keep this for the 12 months or so it's going to take me to eat it all. Okay, right, going to continue filling these jars. Some people skim off this kind of foamy stuff at the top of the jam. I don't bother, it's just part of the jam. Again, that's a kind of show standard type of thing that you might do if you were taking it to a country fair and you wanted to win the gold medal for jam making. I'm not intending to do that. I just want something that I can enjoy on a buttered crumpet. I slightly underestimated the number of jars required. However, there isn't enough here to fill another whole jar. So I'll just fill this little one. And this one we can taste tomorrow. Because unlike the pickles I've been making, this stuff is ready to eat straight away. So that little jar at the front is not even slightly sterile, but it only has to last a day or two. So back in the morning for tasting, I think. Well, actually, we don't have to wait quite that long because there is a little bit left in the pan. Just going to check that isn't going to scald my mouth. No, it's cooled down now. So, very sweet, incredibly fruity. Really rather fragrant, very complex. I'm looking forward to tasting this when it's cooled down properly. It's the following morning, and we have 4 jars of lovely purple jam. I don't think it's necessarily set properly. I think it might still be a little bit on the syrupy side, but it might still be setting, even though it's completely cooled. Anyway, we're going to give it a taste. I'm going to open this little jar here, and I'm going to have that on some crumpets. So, mild visual trigger warning, crumpets have got lots of little holes in them. If you're sensitive to that sort of thing, this might be the point for you to jump out or close your eyes. Okay, 3 crumpets, let's get some butter on that. The moment of truth. Yeah, it is still quite syrupy, that's interesting. I'd have thought that would have set better than that. We did get it to the right temperature, and there must have been a ton of pectin in those skins and elderberries and everything else. So, I don't know, not exactly a fail, but we've made more of a syrup than a jam. Still, I think it's going to taste good. Yeah, so what we've made is very spreadable. I don't suppose that's a really bad thing. And there we go, we've got these pieces of damson skin in there. Now, you might not like that, but I find those quite appealing. Here we go, tasting time. That tastes amazing. It's sharp and tangy from the damsons, It's very sweet because obviously there's a lot of sugar in there. The elderberries have added a really amazing fragrance. Similar to blueberries, I suppose, actually. Yeah, I mean, the blackberry aroma and flavour is also in there somewhere. So I might not have completely nailed the consistency down, although I will see what happens in another 24 hours. But the flavour is amazing. So that is my purple hedgerow jam, or syrup, I suppose. I hope that's been interesting. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again soon.